I'm Ashley Morgan, 32, female. I live in a small, quiet accommodation abounding with books and actual maps, a peaceful adverse to the anarchic ancestors I was built into. My assignment as an architecture archivist is my sanctuary. A boat area history is neatly cataloged, and the truth, however old, is preserved in ink and paper. But the accuracy in my own family was about to bang an anxiously complete lie that had spanned added than 3 decades. All acknowledgement to one final atrocious act from my asleep father. Afore this adventure unfolds, I'd adulation to connect with you. Please let me apperceive in the comments area you're watching from and what time it is in your bend of the world. It's amazing to see how far these beliefs can travel. The air in Mr. Peterson's appointment was blubbery with the aroma of old covering and beginning grief. It had been an anniversary aback my father, Dr. David Morgan, a man whose Isili were as accomplished at anaplasty as they were at inflicting affecting wounds, had passed away from abrupt affection attack. My mother, Diane, sat altogether composed in a costly armchair, her affliction as curated as the alms galas she organized. My older sister, Jessica, sat beside her, occasionally dabbing a tearless eye with a cottony handkerchief, an action I was assertive she'd accomplish for her budding, atrocious, amusing media post. And then there was me, activity like an outsider, a role I had played for as affiliated as I can remember. Mr. Peterson, my father's advocate for over 40 years, austere his throat. He was an affectionate man with weary eyes who had apparent our ancestors through every aloft event, acceptable and bad. Thank you all for coming, he began, his articulation an affable rumble. David was a very complete man. His will reflects that. He larbored specific instructions on how this account was to be conducted. My mother nodded regally, as if expecting to be crowned the queen of his all-inclusive estate. Jessica gave my Duke a clasp that acquainted added like admonishing than a comfort. She had consistently been the aureate child, the one who could do no amiss in our father's eyes. A acknowledged social media influencer with over actor followers, she embodied the avant-garde allure and accessible success he admired. I, on the added hand, was the quiet bookish one. My affection for history and dusty Athenaeum was article my ancestor above board declared a barmy hobby, not a career. He capital a babe who was absorption of his own ambition, and Jessica played that allotment beautifully. I was a disappointment. He never agitated to hide. Mr. Peterson began account through the accepted bequests. My mother was to accept the primary residence, abundant banal portfolio, an affiliated allowance that would ensure she could abide her accommodating endeavors afterwards banking concern. Jessica was bequeathed the family's affluence vacation home in the mountains and an assurance armamentarium that would accomplish her financially independent for life. I captivated my breath, assured my own acknowledgement to be a footnote, conceivably a baby sum to acknowledge my existence. And now, Mr. Peterson said, pausing to adjust his glasses, we arise to the allocation apropos Ashley. He looked at me with an announcement of 18-karat pity and my abdomen askance into a algid knot. David's instructions, actuality, are unconventional. He took an abysmal breath. To his daughter, Ashley Morgan, he bequeaths the butt of his estate, including his advanced properties, his art collection, and authoritative shares in his medical technology company, valued at about $12 million. An aggregate draft abounding the room. Jessica's altogether manicured Duke flew to her chest, her eyes advanced with disbelief. My mother stared at the lawyer as if he aloof announced in an adopted language. I was speechless. It fabricated no sense. This was a man who already told me that my university amount in history was worth beneath in the cardboard it was printed on. Why would he leave me the aggregate of his fortune? Mr. Peterson captivated up a hand to annihilate the assent tension. However, he continued, his articulation dropping. This inheritance is accidental, aloft a specific condition. He apprehended on from the will, his articulation adopting the cold, analytic tone. I knew so able-bodied as my father's. This bequeathal is conditional aloft Ashley Morgan accoutrement scientific, accurate affidavit of her paternity. She charge abide to a DNA analysis administered by incomplete lab to confirm that she is in actuality my biological daughter. Alone aloft receiving a certified address acknowledging a 99.9% benevolent bout will the assets be transferred to her name. The blackout that followed was deafening. It was a bang in the face from aloft the grave. It wasn't aloof a condition. It was the accessible acknowledgement of his doubt. He had an aloof disdain my activity choices. He had questioned my actual identity, my abode in the family. The abasement was a concrete force, acute bottomward on me, stealing the air from my lungs. Tears austere abaft my eyes, but I banned to let them fall. Not in advance of them. My mother was the aboriginal to speak, her articulation a horrify. Ed whispered, "David, why would he do such a thing? It's monstrous." But there was a beam of article abroad in her eyes. Article I couldn't actually decipher, fear. Jessica, however, recovered quickly. Her shock morphed into a smug, pitying smile. "Oh, Ashley, honey," she cooed, her voice dripping with apocryphal sympathy. "Don't you worry, it's aloof a formality. Daddy was consistently so thorough. We all apperceive you're his. You accept his austere eyes." She patted my arm, her draft activity like a brand. It was a performance, and it was for my mother's benefit. But I knew what she was actually thinking. She was the one who was declared to exceed everything. This was aloof, a camp-acting hurdle afore the affluence was appropriately redirected to her. The will declared that if the action wasn't met, the bequest would absence to her. Of course it would. Mr. Peterson explained the logistics. A acclaimed lab had been designated. I would charge to accommodate a sample, and my father's DNA was already on book from my antecedent medical procedure. The after effects would booty 2 to 3 weeks. "I'm sorry, Ashley," he said softly afterwards. My mother and sister had swept out of the appointment in a billow of big-ticket aroma and whispered indignation. "Your ancestor was a complicated man." I aloof nodded, unable to speak. I absolved out of that architecture activity abate than I any time had in my life. The money didn't matter. What mattered was the chilling, posthumous bulletin my ancestor had beatific me. "You were never actually one of us." I agreed to the test, not for the inheritance, but to prove him a miss one after most time. I capital to angle on his grave, authority up the results, and acquaint him that admitting his cruelty, I was his daughter. I had no idea that the accuracy I was about to bear was far added complicated and adverse than my father's simple, spiteful doubt. The after effects would an aloof prove who I was. They would destroy the actual foundation of the ancestors' apprehension I knew. In the 2 weeks that followed the will reading, my activity felt like it was a band and accompaniment of surreal animation. I went through the motions, activity to work, cataloging artifacts, eating, sleeping, but my apperception was consistently replaying the arena in Mr. Peterson's office. The weight of my father's final insult acclimatized abysmal in my bones. It was an altered affectionate of affliction to be so thoroughly alone by a parent, even afterwards they were gone. The DNA analysis was scheduled, a simple audacity besom at a sterile, abstract clinic. The action was quick and clinical, abrupt contrast to the affecting anarchy it had unleashed oral me. I acquainted like a case under a microscope, my actuality questioned and analyzed. My mother, Diane, declared me every day. Her calls were an aberrant mix of affected affectionate activity and agilely active anxiety. "Accept you heard annihilation yet, darling?" She would ask, her articulation a little too bright. I aloof can't bug to anticipate of what your ancestor has put you through. It's a disgrace. But her words acquainted hollow, rehearsed. She never asked how I was feeling. She alone asked about the results. It was as if she was waiting for a storm to pass, acquisitive it wouldn't accident her altogether complete life. I started to apprehension a tension in her articulation that hadn't been there before. Abashed activity that fabricated me uneasy. The complete torment, however, came from Jessica. My sister, the self-proclaimed queen of actuality and complete vibes, had apparently decided that my abasement was prime agreeable for her adherent followers. She didn't acknowledge me by name, of course. She was far too able for that. Instead, she started an alternation of posts and videos about abyssal complex family dynamics and healing from generational trauma. In one video, she sat in her Aboriginal white active room, a distinct, complete breach rolling bottomward her cheek. Sometimes the bodies who are declared to adulation you the best can aching you in means you never imagined, she said, her articulation abashed artfully. It's so important to assure your accord and know your worth, alike a back ancestor's challenges your actual identity. Her followers lapped it up. The comments were a flood of accord and praise. You're so brave, Jess. Thank you for actuality so vulnerable, sending you love and a blaze during this difficult time. She was accessioned herself as the victim, the adroit babe dealing with the fallout of a difficult ancestor's secret. She was monetizing my pain, accessed my father's animality into a brand-building opportunity. Anniversary column acquainted like a beginning stab. She battened of the importance of claret ties and how accurate ancestors consistently shines through. A not-so-subtle association that my own ties were in question. One block she declared me. It wasn't to action support. Hey, Ash, she said, her articulation casual. Mom told me you did the test. So adventurous of you. I could apprehend the beam in her voice. I just capital to analysis and, already this is all over and things are settled. I appetite you to apperceive that there's no pressure. You don't accept to feel awkward. D about it. Awkward about what, Jessica? I asked, my articulation flat. Well, she said, buzzed dramatically. The money already it defaults to me. I mean, it's a huge albatross, and I apperceive it must be black for you. But I'll accomplish abiding your taken affliction of. I was cerebration of ambience up a baby assurance for you, article to advise you with your little architecture job. The heiress was breathtaking. She had already decided the outcome. In her mind, I was not my father's daughter, and the affluence was already hers. She wasn't aloof waiting for the results. She was adulatory achievement that hadn't alike happened yet. The after effects haven't arisen back yet, I said, my Duke abbreviating about the phone. Oh, I know, sweetie, but we have to be realistic, don't we? Daddy wouldn't accept put that barb in the will afterwards a reason. He charged except known something, or suspected at least. Her articulation alone to a artful whisper. Between you and me, I anticipate he was aggravating to assure the ancestor's legacy. You apperceive how important our name was to him? That was it. That was the moment my simmering acrimony aloft over into cold, adamantine rage. It wasn't about the money. It was about her complete abridgment of empathy, her blithe apprehension of my downfall. She saw this not as an ancestor's tragedy, but as her coronation. She, the perfect daughter, was assuredly accepting what she deserved, while I, the pretender, was about to be casting out. My little museum job pays my bills, Jessica, I said, my articulation alarmingly quiet. And it's taught me one thing. History has a way of complete the truth, no amount how affiliated it's been buried. You ability appetite to remember that. I abashed up before she could respond. The chat blackboard me shaking. Her animality was so casual, so profound. She wasn't aloof, my sister. She was my rival, and she had been cat and mouse for this moment her complete life. She believed she was advantage to our father's bequest, and she was already planning how she would administer it. And me already, I was acutely accurate to be an imposter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my quiet accommodation amidst by the ghosts of the accomplished, and I acquainted an alien boldness hardening oral me. My father's will was meant to be his final act of control, a way to abase me from the grave. Jessica was application it as a weapon to coalesce her own cachet as the alleged one. They both accepted me to crumble. They accepted me to be a quiet, sad comment in the Morgan ancestors' history. But they had underestimated me. I was an archivist. I spent my canicule coursing through abandoned documents, piecing calm narratives from fragments of the past. My ancestor had a back handed me a puzzle. And as I waited for that envelope from the lab, I promised myself that no amount what it said, I would be the one to break it. The accuracy was coming, and I had activity. It was activity to be far added damaging to them than at any time could be to me. The email accustomed on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks and a day afterwards the will reading. The accountable band was stark and clinical. Ancestors analysis results, case M78B4. For a moment, I stared at it, my heart beating adjoin my ribs. This was it. The agenda envelope that captivated the acknowledgement to the catechism that had haunted me for weeks. My feel hovered over the mouse, a beachcomber of abhorrence washing over me. Allotment of me didn't appetite to know. It was easier to alive with the agnosticism than to face an accuracy that could abolish my identity. But the anamnesis of Jessica's complacent articulation and my mother's abashed calls pushed me forward. I clicked it open. The address was a simple PDF abounding with scientific jargon, percentages, and abiogenetic markers. I circling accomplished the technical data, my eyes analytic for the conclusion. And afresh the first saw it at the basal of the folio in bold, unequivocal text. Conclusion. The declared father, David Morgan, is accepted as the biological ancestor of the subject, Ashley Morgan. The anticipation of ancestors is 99.9998%. A beachcomber of abatement so able it almost buckled me in my armchair done over me. I laughed. A raw, abashed sound. I was his daughter. My father's aftermost atrocious attack to abandon me had failed. I had the proof. I could assuredly put this whole humiliating affliction abaft me. My aboriginal aptitude was to alarm Mr. Peterson, to forward him the address and affirmation what was appropriately mine. I observed the attending on Jessica's face, the affected smile she would accept to adhesive on as she congratulated me. The apprehension was acutely satisfying. I adored the PDF to my desktop and was about to abutting the email back. I noticed something. There was an additional attachment. It was labeled Supplemental Address Familial Markers. I had no like appear in it before. My focus so intent on award the capital conclusion. Curiosity piqued. I clicked it open. This address was different. It seemed to be an added abundant breakdown of the DNA comparison. Not aloof amid me and my father, but including advertent sample. The advertent sample was labeled Subject B sibling. My claret ran cold. I accomplished the lab charge, except used Jessica's DNA as advertence point as well. My father, in his meticulous cruelty, charge except requested abounding familial allegory to ensure there were no ambiguities. I apprehend through the text, my eyes scanning the circuitous data. Best of it was incomprehensible. A alternation of allels and lossy that meant annihilation to me. But afresh I saw arbitrary branch that was written in apparent English. My apperception struggled to action the words. The analysis confirms that Ashley Morgan and David Morgan allotment the appropriate abiogenetic markers for a father-daughter relationship. However, a bag comparing the profiles of Ashley Morgan and the affinity advertent Jessica Morgan, a significant alterity was found. While they allotment affectionate link, they do not allotment the aforementioned benevolent abiogenetic markers. In conclusion, Ashley Morgan and Jessica Morgan are bisected siblings. They accept the same mother, but altered biological fathers. I apprehend the branch afresh and again. The words blurred. The screen swam afore my eyes. It didn't accomplish sense. It was impossible. My father, the admired surgeon, the man who demanded perfection and lineage, the man who put me through this affliction to prove I was his, was not Jessica's father. Jessica, the aureate child, the complete daughter, the one who looked so abundant like him, who acted so abundant like him. My father's final angry act had backfired in the best amazing way imaginable. He had set allurement for me, but it was my sister, his complete admired daughter, who had been bent in it. The antecedent shock gave way to a boundless blitz of emotions. There was an aberrant aphotic vindication. The irony was about too abundant to bear. All my life, I had been fabricated to feel like the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit. And all along, it was Jessica who was the outlier. It recontextualized everything. My father's affected accomplishing on her, his affiliated charge to acclaim her and lift her up. Was it 18-karat benevolent pride? Or was it an atrocious lifelong attempt to argue himself that she was his? Had he known, or had he merely suspected, and was this DNA analysis a final, atrocious attack to affirm his own birth through me, the adolescent he had no doubts about? Afresh my thoughts turned to my mother Dean, with her complete accord and her abashed buzz calls. Her all-overs aback, fabricated perfect, horrifying sense. She wasn't abashed about my feelings. She was abashed that this analysis would bear her secret. She charged except known. She had lived with this lie for 35 years. Her complete life, her continuing in the community, her alliance to an admired and able man. It was all congenital on a foundation of deceit. I leaned back in my chair, the 2 PDFs accessible on my screen, 2 documents that had actually rewritten my family's history. The Aboriginal one was my shield, the affidavit of my identity. The second one was my sword. My ancestor had advised the will to be an apparatus of abasement for me, but he had unknowingly accustomed me the apparatus of his own. Animus had joined the wife who had betrayed him and the babe who was not his. I didn't alarm Mr. Peterson. I didn't alarm my mother or Jessica. I sat there in the quiet of my accommodation and I thought. The aching and abasement of the accomplished few weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, ablaze faculty of purpose. Jessica's smug, arrogant articulation echoed in my ears. I'll accomplish abiding your taken affliction of. I was cerebration of ambience up a baby assurance for you. A absinthian smile affected my lips. The roles were about to be reversed. I wasn't activity to be petty or cruel. I was an archivist. I respected the truth, and the accuracy in its absoluteness was activity to be revealed. But it would be on my agreement and in my own time. The will account wasn't over. There was activity to be additional act, and this time I would be the one administering the show. The canicule afterward, the analysis acquainted like active in a different reality. The apple al fresco, my accommodation affiliated as normal, but within its walls, I was a historian excavating the charcoal of my own family. The DNA address was a Rosetta Stone, and armed with its adverse translation, I began to attending at the accomplished through a new lens. My job had accomplished me to be meticulous, patient, and thorough. I approached my family's history with the aforementioned able disengagement I would accord to accumulating of forgotten letters, analytic for acceptance evidence for the cracks in the official narrative. My Aboriginal footfall was to examine old ancestors' photographs, not for the blessed memories they were declared to represent, but for the attenuate clues I might accept missed. I pulled out Erinatius albums, my parents' Belle's photos, pictures of Jessica's Aboriginal birthday, my own christening, an account afterwards picture. I saw the aforementioned story. My father, David, ablaze at Jessica, holding her aloft as if she were a trophy. His pride was so immense, so performative. With me, his smiles were more reserved, his aspect stiffer. Anybody had consistently said Jessica was the spitting angel of him. Aforementioned aciculate jawline, aforementioned assured smile. But now looking closer, I saw it was an illusion. Her appearance were similar but not identical. The affinity was in her mannerisms, the way she agitated herself, things an adolescent learns and mimics. The concrete accuracy was far less convincing now that I knew what to attending for. My analysis afresh angry to my mother. I bear to accept thee aback. And who of her secret? Thus acquainted like the greatest betrayal of all. Who is this added man? Was it a cursory activity or article more? I started with my mother's activity of 4, and anon afterwards she affiliated my father. She was assistant aback they met. He was a blaze and ambitious surgical resident. Endemic was hailed as an aerial romance. He was the handsome apprentice doctor. She was the beautiful, admiring woman who gave up her career to accession of ancestors and administer his home. I went to the accessible library archives, my own able territory, and began analytic through old newspapers and amusing registers from the year Jessica was conceived. It acquainted ghoulish, like I was spying on my own family's past. I focused on the social events my parents would accept attended, hospital fundraisers, alms balls, association dinners. My mother, Diane Morgan, was generally mentioned consistently on the arm of my father. But as I sifted through the photos and captions, one name started to arise with hasty frequency. A man alleged Julian Croft. He was a visiting surgeon from Europe, absorbing and handsome man who formed at my father's hospital for a 1-year fellowship. There were photos of him at the aforementioned contest as my parents. In one, he was bedlam with my mother, his duke comatose on her arm in a way that was aloof, a little too familiar. My father stood hardly to the side, his announcement unreadable. In another, account mentioned Dr. Croft's departure at the end of his fellowship. Aloof a few months afore my mother would accept accomplished, she was abundant with Jessica. The timeline was razor thin, but it was there. Julian Croft was a ghost, a man who had swept into their lives and afresh disappeared. An online trace revealed he had alternate to France, become an acclaimed pediatric surgeon, and had ancestors of his own. He anesthetized abroad 5 years ago. He was at his sleep end, but he was additionally actual allotment of the puzzle. The final and best difficult allotment of my analysis was to join my own memories. I apprehension aback to my childhood, analytic for moments of discord, for block of the tongue, for annihilation that hinted at the truth. I remembered the arguments. They were rare, but aback they happened. They were volcanic. My ancestor would get a certain look in his eyes, admixture of acerbity and abysmal blood-soaked pride. I recalled one fight in particular. I was about 10 years old. My ancestor had to rise home late, and I overheard him babble at my mother in their bedroom. His words were muffled, but I heard one by word clearly. "Do you anticipate I'm a fool, Diane? Do you booty me for a complete fool?" My mother had been crying, her articulation a desperate whisper. The abutting day, aggregate was back to normal. The restriction glossed over with artificial politeness. At the time, I assumed it was about money or work. Now, I wondered if it was article far added fundamental. Had my ancestor known, or had he aloof suspected? The article in the will was his final atrocious gambit. He couldn't allege my mother without destroying his own acceptability and the complete ancestor's angel he had curated for decades. He couldn't accost Jessica without ballyhoo her world. So he aimed his suspicion at me, the one he already acquainted burst from. He must have apprehension that if I was his, afresh by extension, Jessica charged me too. It was a flawed, atrocious logic, but it was the alone way he could seek an acknowledgement afterwards, alarming up his own bequest while he was alive. He had weaponized his will to get the one accuracy he couldn't accompany himself to ask for. Armed with a timeline, a name, and a lifetime of reevaluated memories, I acquainted Reddy. The quiet archivist had become a clandestine investigator of her own life. The adventure was no best aloof about a DNA result. It was about a web of lies that had ensnared everyone. My mother's betrayal, my father's bashful suspicion, Jessica's unearned status, and my own lifetime of activity, like a second-ass aborigine in my own home. It was all connected. I saved all my findings, the agenda copies of the photos, the bi-weekly clippings, the timeline I had anxiously constructed. I beatific the Aboriginal DNA report, the one acknowledging my paternity. To Mr. Peterson, I artlessly wrote, "Please find the absorbed address as per the will's instructions. I will be in draft anon apropos the alteration of assets." I deliberately bear the additional report. That one was not for the lawyer. It was for my family. The date was set. The evidence was collected. Now all that was larboard was the achievement, and I knew actually area and when it was activity to booty place. With the official acceptance of my paternity-atific to Mr. Peterson, the acknowledged auto began to turn. He declared me to congratulate me, his articulation filled with 18-karat relief. "I'm so glad, Ashley," he said. "I never for a moment doubted it, but I'm admiring we can put this delicacy to rest. The asset alteration action will activate immediately. It will booty a few weeks to agree everything." "Actually, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I'd like to put authority on that. There are some unresolved family matters. I'd like to appeal a final affair in your appointment with my mother and sister present. Anticipate of it as a added will reading." There was a abeyance on the added end of the line. "A meeting? Is aggregate all right, Ashley?" "Aggregate will be," I replied. "Let's agenda it for next Friday. That should accord anybody abundant time to prepare." He agreed, admitting with a adumbration of abashing in his voice. The moment I abashed up, I began my preparations. This wasn't activity to be an emotional access or agreeable match. My ancestor was a man of absorption and logic. My mother and sister thrived on drama and accessible perception. I would accommodated them on an acreage of my own choosing, one of cold, adamantine facts. For the next week, I operated like administrator advancing for aperture night. My Aboriginal alarm was to my mother. "Mom," I said, my tone neutral. "Mr. Peterson is hosting a final affair abutting Friday to go over the details of the inheritance. He needs you and Jessica to be there to assurance some final papers." "Oh, of course, darling," she said, abatement calamity her voice. She apprehension it was over. The after effects came aback then. "Everything is fine. Aggregate is as it should be," I said, allotment my words carefully. It wasn't a lie. My abutting alarm was to Jessica. She answered on the third ring, her articulation clipped. "Ashley, I accept your calling to gloat." "Not at all," I said smoothly. "I'm calling to allure you to a final affair at Mr. Peterson's appointment on Friday. He needs us all there to agree the estate." She was bashful for a moment. I could almost hear the apparatus axis in her head. The disappointment wearing with her charge to advance a adroit facade. "Fine," she finally bit out. "I'll be there. I accept congratulations are in order. You charge be thrilled." "I'm aloof animated the accuracy is out," I replied, Absolution, the ambiguity of the account adhere in the air. With the affair set, I able my presentation. I created a simple, elegant binder for anniversary of them. I wasn't activity to be theatrical, but I capital the affirmation to be undeniable. Inside anniversary folder, I placed 3 abstracts anxiously arranged. The first was an archetype of the added DNA report, the one that showed Jessica and I were half-sisters. I accent the concluding branch in yellow. The additional certificate was a book out of the timeline I had created assuming Dr. Julian Crofts' acquaintance at the hospital cross-reference with the apperception date for Jessica. The third and final certificate was a accumulating of 3 photographs I had scanned from the old albums. The one of my mother laughing with Dr. Croft, addition of my ancestor attractive on with that aberrant blood-soaked expression, and a side-by-side comparison of Dr. Croft's able hedge attempt abutting to a contempo photo of Jessica. The resemblance, already you knew to attending for it, was uncanny. They had the aforementioned eyes. I spent the draft of the anniversary an accompaniment of calm resolve. I went to work, immersing myself in the quiet adjustment of the archives. The history of strangers was a comfort, an admonition that stories of secrets and lies were as old as time itself. My own adventure was aloof, one of many, but it was abundance to conclude. There was no acerbity larboard in me, alone an abstruse faculty of purpose. My father's will accept Benetast, but not the one he intended. It was an analysis of my character. Would I crumble beneath the humiliation? Would I baste out in anger? Or would I handle the accuracy with the dignity and absorption that he, in his own askance way, had consistently valued? The night before the meeting, I sat at my accommodation and looked about at the activity I had congenital for myself, a life completely abstracted from the Morgan family's ball and wealth. I had my career, my friends, my quiet independence. The $12 actor was an amazing sum, but at that moment, it felt secondary. What I was about to affirmation was far added admired than money. I was claiming my own narrative. I was demography the adventure they had accounting for me, the adventure of the disappointing second best daughter, and I was alteration it with the red ink of truth. I slept soundly that night for the aboriginal time in weeks. I was not nervous. I was not afraid. I was an archivist and I was simply activity to present the actual record. The fallout would be endemic to manage. The abasement would be theirs to bear. My father, and his adventure for accuracy he couldn't face, had accustomed me the ability to declassify the best guarded secret of the Morgan family. And tomorrow in that stuffy, there-bound office, I was activity to broadcast it. The atmosphere in Mr. Peterson's office was abrupt adverse to the Aboriginal meeting. The air of affected affliction was gone, replaced by apparent tension. My mother and Jessica sat on one ancillary of the ample amber table, an affiliated advance of artificial smiles and expensive outfits. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, apparently blockaged the assurance on her latest column about rising aloft ancestors' negativity. My mother kept cutting bottomward her already complete cottony blouse, her movements aciculate and anxious. I sat adverse them, a distinct book folder resting on the table in advance of me. Mr. Peterson sat at the head, attractive, uneasy, acutely analysis that this was more than a simple signing of papers. "Thank you for coming," he began, ambiguity some documents. "As you know, Ashley has met the altitude of the will. We're actuality today to agree the alteration of assets. And before we do that," I interrupted, my articulation ablaze and calm, "it allowable the absorption of the room." Both my mother and sister looked up, afraid by my assertiveness. I believe there are a few capacity from the address that we charge to altercate as a family. Jessica scoffed a baby ugly sound. "What added is there to discuss? You won. You're accepting the money. Just sign the affidavit so we can all get on with our lives." This isn't about the money, Jessica, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. This is about the truth. Dad capital the accuracy afterwards all. That's why he put us all through this, isn't it? I slid 2 folders beyond the table. One in advance of my mother, one in advance of Jessica. I accept these accord to you. My mother stared at the binder as if it were a snake. Jessica, however, opened chastening with a flick of her wrist, her expression one of apathetic annoyance. Her eyes scanned the Aboriginal page, the accent DNA report. I watched as the color drained from her face. Her complete influencer accomplished accord burst into actor pieces. Her aperture opened and closed, but no complete came out. She looked from the cardboard to me, her eyes advanced with abhorrence and disbelief. My mother, seeing Jessica's reaction, fumbled to accessible her own folder. Her Isley trembled so berserk she could barely lift the page. She apprehended the conclusion, and a low, glottal beef able her lips. She angled aback in her chair, her face an affectation of complete devastation. The abstruse she had adequate for 35 years was lying exposed on the able apparent of the table. What is this? Jessica finally stammered, her articulation a whisper. This is a joke. It's fake. It's the added address from the same accredited lab, I said evenly. Dad didn't aloof analysis my paternity. In his thoroughness, he requested a bounding familial comparison. He capitaled to be actually sure, and now we are. We have the aforementioned mother, Jessica, but we do not accept the aforementioned father. I gave them a moment to let the words bore in before I continued. About face the page. Jessica's abashed fingers addled to the timeline. She saw the name Julian Croft. She saw the dates. My mother didn't charge to look. She knew the name. She knew the dates. She aloof stared at me, her eyes pleading. And the aftermost page, I said, my articulation softening slightly. This was the final actual blow. Jessica angry to the photographs. She saw the account of her mother with Julian Croft. She saw her own face abutting to his. The affinity was absolute. It was in the appearance of her eyes, the ambit of her smile. It was an accuracy that couldn't be denied or spun for social media. She wasn't a Morgan by blood. She was a Croft. The blackout in the allowance was absolute, burst alone by my mother's quiet, ragged sobs. Jessica, aloof, stared at the account of the man who was her biological father. Her announcement, an anarchic mix of confusion, betrayal, and profound loss. The appearance she had congenital her complete activity upon. The legacy she acquainted so advantage to had been a lie. Mr. Peterson, who had been watching this unfold with abashed bewilderment, assuredly spoke. Ashley, I don't understand. My ancestor suspected, I explained, access to him. I anticipate he suspected for actual affiliated time. He couldn't accompany himself to accost it. So he devised this atrocious analysis for me, hoping it would achieve his own doubts. He never absurd what it would actually uncover. I looked back at my mother. Did he, Mom? Did he any time ask you? My mother befuddled her head, tears alive bottomward her face. We had an action years ago, she whispered. He asked me if there was anything I bare to acquaint him. I denied it. I swore to him. I was so scared. I've been afraid every day since. Jessica assuredly activated her articulation, and it was abounding with acidity I had never heard before. She wasn't speaking to me. She was attractive at our mother. You lied, she hissed. My accomplished life. You let me believe. You let him believe. How could you? I admired your father. My mother cried, her aegis anemic and pathetic. I fabricated a mistake, a terrible mistake. I zebuous activity to acquaint him. But afresh I activate out I was pregnant. And I was a coward. Jessica's amusement was hysterical. "You're not a coward. You're a monster." She stood up so abruptly her armchair aching audibly adjoined the floor. She effective her purse, her movements hasty and uncoordinated. She didn't attending at me as she absolved out. She didn't attending at anyone. She aloof fled, abrogation her folder, her complete baseborn history abaft her on the table. My mother remained, complaining into her hands. Mr. Peterson, to his credit, looked on with sympathy, but he said nothing. The allowance was abundant with the accident of a family. I stood up. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my articulation close again. "As the body accepted biological beneficiary of David Morgan, I appetite to accomplish some amendments to my inheritance." My mother looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with fear. She apparently apprehension I was activity to cut her off to leave her with nothing. "I appetite to authorize a trust," I continued, "for the apprenticeship and abundance of any accouchement Jessica may have. They are afterwards all my nieces or nephews. They are innocent in all of this." I paused. "As for the rest, I will be demography abounding ascendancy of the acreage as my ancestor intended. The Morgan legacy, it turns out, is abundance to manage." I left my mother ball in that office. As I absolved out into the ablaze afternoon sun, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I acquainted quiet. The storm had passed. The accuracy had been told. The final account was over. And for the aboriginal time in my life, I was free. The aftermath of that affair was not abrupt atomic event, but a slow, quiet unraveling. The shock waves rippled through what was larboard of our family, altering the mural forever. Jessica abolished for 2 weeks. Her social media went dark. Her actor followers were larboard with a final airy column about her admired brand of matcha tea, an apparition from an activity that no best existed. Aback she finally resurfaced, it was through a lawyer. She beatific at academic apprehension that she was accurately alteration her aftermost name. She didn't change it to Croft. She chose a new name entirely. Disengagement ties with both the man who had aloft her and the man who had fathered her. She capital a complete reinvention, a activity adjourned apple pie of the Morgan lie. I heard through Mr. Peterson that she awash her address and confused to the added ancillary of the country. We haven't announced since, and I don't know if we anytime will. The assurance I accustomed for her approaching accouchement charcoal untouched. A bashful attestation to acquaintance that was burst by abstruse it never knew it held. My mother, Diane, was an altered story. The abolition of her complete activity beatific her into abysmal depression. Her company from the charity boards who had already flocked to her ancillary, boring drifted abroad as whispers of the aspersion began to circulate. The Morgan name, already an attribute of prestige, was now attenuated by gossip. Afterwards, my father's ability and with her own credibility shattered, she became an amusing pariah. She awashed the ample ancestors' home, unable to buck the weight of its memories and ghosts. She confused into a small, tasteful condominium, abode with no history. Our accord is complicated. She called me about it ages afterwards the meeting. She didn't apologize, not directly. Apologies were not in my mother's nature. Instead, she talked about the past, about her bareness as an adolescent wife, about my father's demanding career, about the cursory absorption she accustomed from a absorbing visitor. They weren't excuses, but they were the abutting she could arise to an explanation. For the aboriginal time, I saw her not as a monster, but as a flawed, abashed woman who had fabricated an adverse aberration and spent a lifetime aggravating to outrun it. We allege occasionally now. The calls are awkward and abounding with long silences. There may not be forgiveness, but there is a fragile, acting understanding. The acrimony I held for her has mostly faded, replaced by a quiet, weary pity. As for me, my life afflicted in means I never expected. Demography ascendancy of my father's acreage was an awe-inspiring task. I didn't appetite to run a medical tech company. So with the board's approval, I answered a talented executive from oral to the CEO position and took a bench as the chairperson. My role is strategic, not operational. Abrogation me chargeless to abide my assignment at the museum. The Athenaeum are still my sanctuary. The abundance has not afflicted who I am, but it has changed what I can do. I acclimated a cogent allocation of the bequest to authorize the David and Ashley Morgan Foundation for actual preservation. It acquainted like the complete amalgam of his bequest and my passion. We armamentarium undersource museums, digitize brittle actual documents, and accommodate grants for adolescent academics, the affectionate of barmy assignment my father already mocked. It is my way of anniversary, the allotment of him that was my ancestor, while application his assets to support the apple. He never understood. It's a quiet clandestine irony that brings me a faculty of peace. Sometimes I appointment my father's grave. The able granite stone is simple. Dr. David Morgan, admired bedmate and father. I often wonder what he would anticipate if he knew the abounding accuracy his will had unearthed. Would he be horrified, vindicated? Would he feel affliction for the affliction he acquired me? Or alone for his own blindness? I don't abhorrence him anymore. In a twisted, painful way, his final act set me free. He effected a reckoning that, while devastating, ultimately accustomed the truth to surface. He gave me the accoutrement to annihilate the actual facade. He spent his activity building. My bequest wasn't to live the money, the properties, or the stocks. My accurate bequest was the truth, the accuracy of who I am and who I am not. I am Ashley Morgan, babe of David Morgan. I am an archivist, a chairperson, a quiet woman who activate her backbone, not in a bloodline, but in a library. My family, as I knew it, is gone. It was a beautiful, anxiously complete lie. In its abode is something smaller, quieter, and added honest. And in the end, that is a legacy worth added than any fortune.